The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more.
So I want to get across the idea that even though we're talking about SMRs, they are fairy tales. They don't exist. So we can't use language that kind of reinforces the fact that they do, which is what you hear when you hear all these wonderful reports about what small modulars are doing or supposed to be doing. They're not doing it because they don't exist. These are theoretical concepts. They are designs. They are PowerPoints. They are slick marketing brochures. And none of those contribute to our electrical grid.
Are you speeding the energy transition? Here at the Clean Power Hour, our hosts Tim Montague and John Weaver bring you the best in solar, batteries, and clean technologies every week. Want to go deeper into decarbonization? We do too. We're here to help you understand and command the commercial, residential, and utility solar, wind, and storage industries. So let's get to it. Together we can speed the energy transition.
Today on the Clean Power Hour, nuclear energy. I'm Tim Montague, your host. Check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. Give us a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify. As our listeners know, the nuclear industry is on ice in the United States. We haven't commissioned but one nuclear power plant in something like the last 30 years. There's not a lot of action in nuclear. The nuclear engineers that I know are fleeing the industry and joining wind and solar because that's where the growth opportunity lies. And yet, our government is promoting SMRs, Small Modular Nuclear Reactors. And so my guest today is David Kraft. He is the Executive Director of the Nuclear Energy Information Service, and he's here to set the record straight about SMRs and the state of nuclear power in my home state and his home state, the state of Illinois. Welcome to the Clean Power Hour, Dave.
Thank you very much. Good to see you again, Tim.
This is a homecoming. I've known you for several decades. You're a well-known activist in energy and the environment and social justice arenas in the Chicago area. I'm grateful for your work, and I'm excited to finally do an episode on nuclear power. It's long overdue. So tell us, Dave, how did you get interested in the nuclear industry and come to NEIS?
Well, to start with, Nuclear Energy Information Service turns 42 on June 7th of 2023. So we've been around a number of decades, and our purpose really was twofold. We wanted to watchdog the nuclear industry, which when we started was Commonwealth Edison. It's morphed over time into other companies, but also to translate a difficult, arcane, scientific issue into language that Joe and Josephine Couch Potato could understand. There are a lot of complex issues that, frankly, we all have to have some level of understanding about if we're going to make any kind of competent decisions about them. Genetic engineering, GMO foods, AI, and certainly nuclear is one of those. So that was our intent when we started, many, many decades ago. Over the years, we adopted as many activist responses as we thought was appropriate. At first we thought we would just be educational, but we realized that education without action is useless. So we did various activism things, held demonstrations. We did a lot of public presentations. Eventually we started working with legislators, trying to inform them on the complexity of the issues, both at the federal level and the state level. So over the years, we've pretty much done it all in all capacities. You asked me, how did I come to this? Well, I would say by accident. It was called 3 Mile Island. I was actually pro-nuclear like many 20-somethings were back in the day. It was something positive that America could offer the world, it had a benefit instead of blowing something up. But in 1975, there was a huge fire down at a nuclear plant in Alabama. And it turned out that an idiot doing a leak test using a lit candle ignited the insulation between the walls in a section of the reactor building, which ultimately resulted in a $200 million fire. And I'm thinking, whoa, is this the sophisticated technology that we're all supposed to be waiting with bated breath for? It turns out, too, that all the experts who were advising what to do on site were wrong. And it took a local fire chief to come in and say, we're going to hose the thing to put the fire in. So it really broke through this myth that nuclear is some magical, high-tech, invulnerable process of technology that we've invented, and really started to show the true vulnerabilities of the technology. When 3 Mile Island hit, I think that pretty much said it all. Folks don't remember that Jimmy Carter was a nuclear engineer, by the way, in the nuclear Navy. So he was on call when TMI hit. And he made some decisions which are controversial. He not only got us through the 3 Mile Island accident, but he put into permanence a ban on what is called reprocessing of the spent nuclear fuel, which would take the fuel and try and reuse it in some way. That was originally instituted by President Ford temporarily. When Carter took over, he made it permanent because of the proliferation potential that has worldwide to make nuclear weapons. So all of these things started happening. And as my girlfriend and I were leaving the theater watching around the time of the 3 Mile Island accident, the China Syndrome was the name of the movie. Yeah. We were given a brochure to come to a meeting at the end of the week someplace else. And since then, I've been involved with the anti-nuclear community and the safe energy advocacy communities to terminate nuclear power and replace it with appropriate renewables, energy efficiency, and now you can add to that energy storage and better transmission. So it's a long road, but here we are, 42 years later, doing the same message.
The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by Dinawatts. If you're a solar PV asset manager or performance engineer, you need better data and better business intelligence. With Dinawatts' digital twin benchmarking technology, you get more accurate, efficient, and faster performance measurement results. The 4th generation Dino recently completed a technical review by DNV. You can download the report at dinawatts.com. That's DENOWATTS.com. Now back to the show. Yeah, I too remember 3 Mile Island. My parents were very involved in energy and the environment issues in the Four Corners area of New Mexico, fighting coal, but also uranium mining. Major environmental hazard and environmental justice issue because uranium dust is radioactive and causes cancer among the miners who are doing that work. And then in 1986, Chernobyl happened in the spring of 1986. I was signed up to go to Norway as an exchange student and did so in June of 1986. And of course, Norway and Sweden and Finland were impacted directly by the fallout from Chernobyl. The fallout fell onto the ground and contaminated the vegetation that was consumed by the reindeer and the sheep, which are major livestock resources in those countries. And so it was an active conversation at the University of Oslo, where I was a summer school student learning to speak Norwegian, that radioactivity had contaminated the food web, and they had to cull the herds that summer and dispose of that meat because it was not safe for human consumption.
Well, sadly, Tim, that accident, if you want to call it an accident, we don't. We call it an intentional. It's still going on because there are portions of Scotland where you can't eat the sheep. In Central Europe, they still advise you do not eat mushrooms and not eat wild boar meat because there's still enough residual radiation in the soils. And of course, it bioconcentrates as it works its way up the food chain. I spent a number of years in Hamburg, Germany, and they have an annual event where they make this special mushroom dish called Pfeffernuss. No, that's fine. That's a cookie. Sorry. Pfefferling. And it's a cute little orange mushroom, but after Chernobyl, they stopped doing it because they couldn't guarantee that these mushrooms would be safe for consumption anymore. So that disaster is still ongoing in that respect. And I think we just found out with the Russian occupation of Chernobyl earlier last year, the report was that those soldiers had to be taken to Belarus for treatment because of the radiation exposure, because they were camping in the soils in the forests around the Chernobyl reactor.
So the Chernobyl reactor is in what is now Ukraine? Yeah. So the other context is that, as my listeners know, Illinois is the most nuclearized state in the United States. We have approximately 40% of our grid power coming from nuclear power. I myself live 50 miles from a nuclear power plant, the Clinton Power Station, which has a lovely lake around it, which I sail on. And I appreciate that resource. It is a wonderful natural resource now, since they built the lake in the late 70s. But most Americans have no idea that Illinois is so nuclearized. How did Illinois become so nuclearized, Dave?
Well, it's an interesting history post-World War II, where the Eisenhower administration is the one most well-known for atoms for peace, wanting to take the power, the destructive power of the bomb, transform it into something positive. And as many people know, the nuclear age began in Chicago, December 2nd, 1942, at the University of Chicago Stagfield squash courts. First chain reaction that we controlled took place there. Later, that was moved to the suburbs of Chicago, which then were forested areas, Argonne Laboratory. And then Argonne had to move a second time, where it's presently located now. So there was a national laboratory connection. We had a utility at the time, Commonwealth Edison, which was very interested in the technology. But when we actually got a hold of a couple of annual reports from back in the day, where the company is talking to its shareholders about this wonderful new energy resource, which not only would it give unlimited power cheaply, but it would create a situation where the government would buy back the nuclear waste to get the plutonium to manufacture nuclear weapons. Out there in black and white, they weren't even trying to hide it then. So this is the seedy side of nuclear, which gets swept under the carpet, except on episodes of The Simpsons, that nuclear power and nuclear weapons are still intricately bound together. So back in the day, that was the push here in Illinois. We had Argonne, we had a willing utility, we had a very eager government to push this forward. And so the first privately invested commercial nuclear reactor was opened at Dresden, Illinois, Dresden 1. The reactor is now closed because it was inefficient and actually started exposing its workers to high levels of radiation. But ultimately what it did was it, over the years, enabled Illinois to build 14 reactors total, of which 11 are still operating. If we were a nation, we would be the 11th largest nuclear power in the world, just behind Ukraine, which is not an enviable place, no matter how you describe it right now.
So Illinois has more nuclear power plants than France?
No, France is
number one.
Number 3, I believe. U.S. is number 1. We have 92 operating reactors now.
Okay. Yeah.
And after that, you have Russia, Japan, France. Those are the biggies, the big four. And then a sprinkling, countries. England and South America has a few. Interestingly enough, the 4th largest economy in the world, Germany, turned off its last nuclear reactor 3 weeks ago. And they will no longer do nuclear, and they are going full bore into the renewable energy future, which is what we believe the United States needs to do as well.
Yeah, in 2011, when Fukushima happened, which was a very serious major natural disaster or man-made disaster, that's when there was a major thrust in Germany, right, to phase out nuclear. And And Europe is a very interesting place. I like to say, if you want to see the future of energy, go to Northern Europe, because they don't have fossil resources the way we do in the United States, with the exception of the North Sea. The Norwegians have a lot of oil, but in general, energy is very expensive, relatively speaking, and solar and wind are much further along, and so. And then the other backdrop here is that once you have built a nuclear power plant, it is a relatively low carbon source of electricity. And so on some level, I'm a proponent of keeping those facilities running if they are running safely. We still haven't solved the long-term problem, right, for the waste. These plants produce used radioactive waste, which has to be stored for a very long time. Some of it can be processed and used in military applications, which is a hazard in and of itself. But nonetheless, there is a waste stream, which America has not dealt with. I don't know if you want to make any comments about that. And then I'd love to get into this current wave of okay, we're keeping what we have alive. There are major initiatives in Illinois and other places. And then a wave to drive a next generation of what they are now referring to as small modular nuclear reactors.
Right. And actually, both the waste and the small modular issue are intertwined, and I'll get to that in a minute when we go discuss that in more detail. But I want to back up a step. I understand your and others' analysis that, yes, nuclear plants are lower carbon in terms of an energy resource at the site of generation than certainly any fossil fuel resource you could pick. But our organization back in 1999 and then back in 2007 adopted a carbon-free, nuclear-free approach to energy. And, it sounds like a great slogan. Can it be done? Well, yes, it can. And there are a lot of people who've already crunched numbers to show how it can be done, how long it will take, how much it will cost, going all the way back to 2007. So it's not that we can't do it. There's absolutely no technological reason why not. And that's what I wanted to come back to in your statement. I've spoken with legislators who feel the same way you do, that, because the climate crisis is so urgent right now and nuclear plants are lower carbon, we should keep the ones we have running. Even Greta Thunberg has made public statements in that direction. What fails to get appreciated, though, is two major issues that never get brought up in the discussion of nuclear. I touched on one a minute ago, and that is the connection between nuclear weapons and nuclear power. But the second one is how much of our situation is technological barriers as opposed to self-fulfilling prophecies. And what I mean by that is, if you look back over the last 30 years or 40 years of energy production, where we're trying to head with renewables, and you line that up with who controls the energy decision-making, it's the fossil fuel and nuclear industry people and their allies in government. So they have very adeptly engineered circumstances where they create the self-fulfilling prophecy conclusion that, we don't have enough renewables now, therefore we need to keep, gas plants running. We need to keep coal with carbon capture running. We need to keep nuclear running until we build enough renewables. What doesn't get stated, though, is, again, all those political decisions of what made that happen and who controls those decisions. I'll give you an example. Must be about 5 or 6 years ago, I guess. There was a community in Northwest Illinois, which was municipally owned utility. They owned their own stuff, they generated their own power. But they also owned a segment of transmission line, which extended to the Iowa border. It was about 20 miles long. It wasn't very long. And they decided they didn't want to have that anymore as part of their portfolio. So they were going to put it up for market sale. They did a closed bid, up and up bidding process. And at the end of the day, the bid went to a company called NextEra Energy, which used to be Florida Power and Light. I believe it's the largest renewables generator in terms of utilities in the country today. So NextEra won the bid. But at the 11th hour and 59th minute, Commonwealth Edison and Exelon intervened and requested that the Illinois Commerce Commission halt the sale because somehow they felt they were supposed to get first right of bidding in this process. Now, there was no law that guaranteed that. There was no precedent even that guaranteed that. But the Commerce Commission went along with it for some reason. It was still the Madigan reign of error ongoing. Who knows? But what happened was when they opened that proceeding, it was all Commerce Commission proceedings are about 11 months long. Well, NextEra didn't want to wait around 11 months. So they withdrew their bid eventually and went to Indiana to do business. And Commonwealth Edison Exelon bought the 20 miles of power line. The problem there was that power line was going to wheel in renewable generated electricity from Iowa, which would have, I don't know if it would have completely solved the issue, but it would have put a dent in, does Illinois have enough renewable generated power to displace carbon or nuclear? So that's what I mean by self-fulfilling prophecy. If you can control the outcomes, either politically, technologically, whatever, then you can make these statements of, oh, we don't have enough renewables, or renewables aren't ready, or they won't be ready until, and in the meantime, we need this. That's been the pattern. And that's what needs to be confronted moving forward on whether we need more nuclear, whether we need gas or anything else. So I want to really make that point because it's never made in the halls of Springfield.
The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more. So here we are in 2023. Vogtle in Georgia was just commissioned after, I think, 17 years or so of construction and budget overruns. A total fiasco for the residents of Georgia financially. They're paying dearly for that. But there is a lot of talk in the news, Dave, about SMRs, often just referred to as SMRs, Small Modular Reactors, technically Small Modular Nuclear Reactors. And when you watch videos or interviews with folks like Mark Jacobson, who is a professor at Stanford University, one of our preeminent academics on the energy transition, it's very clear that there's nothing really new about SMRs, except the scale of the projects are smaller. These are on the order of 50 megawatt projects, from what I can tell, as opposed to gigawatt or multi-gigawatt scale power plants. So they're smaller, and you would think, okay, yeah, a smaller nuclear plant could theoretically get licensed and permitted and constructed in a more timely manner. But from what I can tell, they're not economical. They're not faster to build than traditional nuclear power stations, and they still have all the potential hazards that these, existing power plants have. So set the record straight for us. What are SMRs? Is there a there? And why is the U.S. government so excited about SMRs?
Well, I'm going to take a little credit. I can't say I'm the only one who has done this, but we have snuck that N into the alphabet soup there. Small modular nuclear reactors. Mm-hmm. We also have radioactive waste because the industry, it's part of the marketing aim of the industry to anesthetize the public into the radiation hazard associated with nuclear. So they'll never talk about low-level radioactive waste or high-level radioactive waste. They take the R out in all of their official documents and all the federal definitions. It's LRW, LLW or HLW.
Right.
They take it away. Same with the nuclear reactors here, SMRs, small modular reactors, nuclear. don't bring up the word. So there are words that they will deny the public as sort of an anesthetic, so you don't have to worry about the hazard of nuclear or radiation. All right, so what are they? Let's back up a step. You're right, the technology has been around a long time. Technically, since as long as we've had a nuclear navy, because those reactors are small and they are aboard ship and they are of a certain design, which got scaled up in the 1950s to the big reactors that we have today with all of its problems. But this next wave is qualitatively different. I'd say over the last decade or so, there have been a plethora of designs put forward. I believe it's up to 70 now internationally, different design proposals for these so-called small modular nuclear reactors. It's important to put out some definitions and some characteristics at this point. Even though there's no legal definition for small modular, it's generally understood that a small modular nuclear reactor will be less than 300 megawatts in power output, electrical power output, putting it on par with maybe a gas plant or a small coal plant in output. Within that category, though, there's a further breakdown of three types. There's just what we call micro nukes, which are 10 megawatts or less. These are more for research and testing and proof of concept kinds of things. They're not designed as power plants, to put on the grid. So below 10 megawatts, you're talking micro nukes. And the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana at this point is pursuing a test license for research, not for power output, at the university campus. The next level up goes up to about 100 megawatts. And these are characterized as mini nukes. Here, you're bouncing between, they're big enough where they can produce electricity at a local level, but a lot of interest has been put into these reactors being able to create process steam, which could be used for industrial processes. Finally, everything up to 300 megawatts are just generally the small modular nuclear reactors we talk about as the ones that would be hooked up online to produce electricity. There's another category that we need to be aware of called advanced nuclear reactors. And all SMRs are advanced nuclear reactors, but not all advanced nuclear reactors are SMRs, because some of them can be as large as today's power plants, hundreds of megawatts in size, and be hooked up to the electric grid. They have different characteristics too, but these are enshrined in federal law. They have to meet these various traits or they're not considered advanced reactors. And I'll get to the importance of that a little bit later in our discussion.
So there is a nice Wikipedia page on SMRs. So if you just go to Wikipedia and search on SMR, you'll find that page with all the different companies and countries that are in the game, so to speak. So what's going on in the U.S. around SMRs, Dave?
So what's happening here? We would probably say the flurry of activity about small modular nuclear reactors began with the Biden administration. This is one of the more pro-nuclear administrations we have seen in decades. They are going full tilt to revitalize the nuclear industry at almost all levels. And one of the big levels, of course, is to promote small modular nuclear reactors. We saw that with the Infrastructure Act and with the IRA legislation that passed over the last couple of years. Some of our colleagues have calculated out that if some of those loans are loan guarantees and things are all cumulatively added up, we're talking on the order of $200 billion worth of investment going towards nuclear power from the various legislation that's out there. You layer onto that the Department of Energy grants, which are being let right now to various institutions like University of Illinois, Purdue, Texas Christian, Abilene, who want to do the micro nukes for research. And what we see going on here is, a huge money trough where everybody wants to get in on the feeding frenzy. So this is one of the big drivers for small nuclear right now, is the fact that there's so much money being thrown at it. The second is there's been an extremely well orchestrated, and I mean professionally orchestrated, public relations campaign going on for the last 2 years involving both the nuclear industry and allies in government, like the Secretary of Energy Granholm, going around the country doing this pro-nuclear spiel everywhere she goes. It is really a solid effort. They have been working with some of the pro-nuclear grassroots organizations like Michael Schellenberger's group to get into every state that has a moratorium on building new reactors like Illinois does, and get those moratoriums repealed as soon as possible to open the door for the floodgate of expected small modular nuclear reactors. So these guys are putting on the full court press at every level you can imagine: public relations, government, law, and certainly finance. There is another investigation ongoing. This is privately done. We don't have any details yet on it, but who's the big money behind this and why? And when you take a look at some of the big mouth investors like Bill Gates and some of that ilk, you'll see that not only are they putting some of their money up on it and for it, but they're more than happy to feed at the federal trough for the research grants at DOE and elsewhere, whether the project works or not. They're still going to get paid. So that is another driving force on the nuclear front. And of course, they're all hanging their hat on the climate crisis. It's the reason why we should do this. So that's the push. That's how things are moving. And in Illinois, over the last 2 years, we've had legislation introduced both in the House and the Senate, which would repeal the Illinois nuclear construction moratorium. And we have testified at every hearing regarding that. And what we found is that in every case, the moratorium law itself, which is very simple, it says Illinois will not build any nuclear plants until the federal government has a place to dispose of the high-level radioactive waste. Now, how long did that take me to say? That's the law. That's it. That's the moratorium. It's kind of common sense. We joked about it many times saying, what if in Chicago we built the Sears Tower without bathrooms? Where would we be today? Be a qualitatively different building. That's exactly what the nuclear industry has been allowed to do, and apparently will be continued to be allowed to do if small modulars are built. Mm-hmm. So at every hearing, no talk about radioactive waste, or very little, and it all shifted over to expert witnesses about how great small modulars are. Now, what's the problem with small modulars? We listed about 8 or 10 of these, and we hope that your listeners will appreciate this. It just boggled the mind, the willingness to not believe your lying eyes and ears on the part of legislators to push this legislation forward. The first thing, we have been talking about small modulars as if they really exist, and they don't, at least not in the United States. Worldwide, I think there are only 2 in operation. One is in Russia. I think China might have the other one. And even though there are about a dozen outfits that are putting license applications in with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for their designs, only one of those designs has been approved by a company called NuScale. And on NuScale's website, they say that the first and only demonstrator won't be ready until December of 2029. So I want to get across the idea that even though we're talking about SMRs, they are fairy tales. They don't exist. So we can't use language that kind of reinforces the fact that they do, which is what you hear when you hear all these wonderful reports about what small modulars are doing or supposed to be doing. They're not doing it because they don't exist. These are theoretical concepts. They are designs. They are PowerPoints. They are slick marketing brochures. And none of those contribute to our electrical grid. They are the fevered imaginations of very earnest engineers. That's it. And they won't exist as demonstrators until the end of this decade, which means if you add another 5 to 10 years for commercialization to that, they won't even be able to address anything on the climate issue until the 2030s or 2040s, when it'll be too late, according to the IPCC. So let's take the climate issue completely off the table. Small modulars don't exist. They will not contribute in any meaningful way to the climate crisis. Dave Kraft isn't saying so. Gregory Yatsko, physicist, former chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, says so. Dr. Alison McFarland, geologist, former chairwoman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, says so. And a host of other energy analysts from Germany, Great Britain, France, internationally have said small modulars are not suited to deal in any meaningful way with the climate crisis. So that's the first thing. They're fairy tales. In fact, we had a joke about this. How are small modulars and unicorns alike? They don't exist. How are they different? Unicorn poop doesn't last for 250,000 years. So, we really got to get across to people that we're talking fantasy land right now. And we're hitching an energy policy to a product that might not even work. So let's move on. What are some of the other problems? You actually already said a few of them from what you've read. The small modular proposals as designed already have been shown to be more expensive per unit of energy produced, even compared to today's nuclear plants, which required bailouts to keep operating, you might remember. In Illinois, ratepayers are on the hook for over $3 billion worth of bailout guarantees to Constellation Power for the nuclear plants we have in Illinois because they couldn't cut it in the market. They can't compete. Now we're going to add more nuclear reactors to that mix. They won't be able to compete either. So guess what's going to happen? The companies will go to the legislature and say, oh, we need jobs. Oh, we need energy. Bail us out. A National Academy of Sciences report from last year. One of the participants was the former chairwoman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Alison McFarland. They concluded that, again, per unit of energy, small modulars could produce up to 18 times more radioactive waste than today's nuclear reactors, which have no place to dispose of the waste that we have. We have 11,000 tons of radioactive waste in Illinois now. The industry wants to extend their operating licenses, which will almost double that amount.
So let's summarize the challenges that we face with SMRs. They include the basic cost of the technology, which can be upwards of $15 a watt. You can build a solar or wind facility at utility scale for 3 to 6 cents, and so the cost is front and center. But there's the waste issue, there's the proliferation issues, and of course the potential of nuclear disasters. So why don't you just run through those four things in a timely manner, Dave, if you would?
Sure. So as we've already been discussing, economically they're not as good as they propose to be, even with their modularity. It's been calculated that on a per kilowatt hour basis, they'll be more expensive than today's nukes, which means, of course, that they'll be more expensive than renewables that are available today as well. In terms of radioactive waste, National Academy of Sciences report of 2022 indicates that on a per unit of energy basis, these reactors could produce as much as 18 times more radioactive waste than today's generation of reactors. So from the waste standpoint, if you repeal the moratorium in Illinois, it's a wide open barn door to keep producing waste in perpetuity with no place to go. And we'll just end up storing it forever here in the state. So waste is a definite issue on that. One of the ways they claim they're going to try and be more economical, though, or two of the ways I should say, these reactors are being proposed without containment buildings. They claim their designs are so safe, nothing could go wrong, like with the Titanic, I suppose. So there are not any of these very robust, is the term the industry uses, buildings built around them. In some cases, they actually intend to build the reactors underground or below grade at the very least. Mm-hmm. However, we juxtapose those designs with the craters that we got off of YouTube in the industrial district of Mariupol, Ukraine, just to show the equivalence of depth. Had Ukraine gotten small modulars 10 years ago and put them in Mariupol, there wouldn't be anybody able to get near Mariupol because of the radiation contamination, because of being in a war zone and no containment. Another way they claim they're going to reduce costs is by reducing staff. You don't need as many staff members to run these reactors. And because they're so safe, you don't even need a security force anymore. So there are literally some designs that are being put out there without any kind of security, other than whatever you have locally, and with fewer operators manning the ship. This is absurd to us. We just don't understand how they can get away with a straight face making these claims without having any designs to show that it's true or not. So you're trading away safety for alleged reduced costs. You don't know. We would point out that there are environmental justice considerations, because again, you're going to continue to need uranium in some form, and uranium mining is done internationally on largely indigenous lands, which already have not been cleaned up from the previous generation of nuclear power. But one other aspect of the fuel that hasn't been discussed is, at least currently, the reactor designs that they're proposed to use require a very special fuel called HALEU, high assay low enriched uranium. This is not the same kind of fuel that you put in today's reactors, which maybe have an enrichment value of 4%, meaning that the fuel in there had to be juiced up by certain technical processes before it could be used as reactor fuel. HALEU can go up to 20%, almost 5 times as much, which puts it just on the borderline between what would be used commercially for power plants and what could begin to be used for nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. And these people want to shop these reactors around the world and put them in Walmarts and large facilities around the world as if nothing could go wrong using this fuel. And the last joke on us is that the only source of HALEU fuel right now in the United States is Russia. And I thought we were supposed to be having an embargo on their products. So the whole chain from fuel manufacture, from promises, from reactors that don't risk, is so imaginary and so Orwellian as to almost be laughable, except the Biden administration is willing to pour tens of billions of dollars into making it happen. And the nuclear industry is willing to go around to places like Illinois to get the moratoriums repealed so that these people can go ahead with their designs. So clearly it's a monster with no leash that is being proposed here.
The moratoriums. So my understanding is Illinois passed a moratorium on new nuclear construction in 1987.
Correct.
And that was an important watermark because it literally prevents new facilities from being designed and developed in Illinois. Now that moratorium has been repealed or is in the process of being repealed?
It's in the process, both in 2022 and in this legislative session. The pro-nuclear folks have put the hardcore push to get the moratorium repealed. As of our taping today, we're winding down the legislative session. It'll end on this Friday, May 19th. They have not been able to get the bill moved forward. It did sail through every committee hearing that they had, and they had 4 of them. But they were all in the public utilities committees of the House and Senate and not the energy and environment committees. So these, not only that, but half of the members of both of those of the public utilities committees were co-sponsors of the bill to get the moratorium repealed. So you can see that the deck was already politically stacked. When we went into these hearings, there were some legitimate concerns that some people raised, like the reliability of and the availability of power in downstate Illinois in the MISO region, which is much different than northern Illinois, where we have most of the nuclear plants now, which is in a region called PJM. That was a legitimate concern, and we tried to address it. The other issue that came up was the issue of jobs. With the coal fields drying up, the coal plants shutting down, this could be a source for jobs. When we pointed out to the legislators in response that, first of all, because these are imaginary reactors, you're not going to see any jobs till 2035. they just shrugged and moved on. There's nothing. One of the great ironies is the day the Senate passed the bill to go over to the House, a solar farm started construction in Sangamon County, which would be 800 megawatts in capacity. It will be ready next fall to be going online. Yep. Would create 450 construction jobs, all union, working with the unions down there to continue jobs beyond construction for the operation of the plant. And we said, look, by the time you get the first demonstrator of small modulars built, you could build 5 more of these farms. Wouldn't 4,000 megawatts of power make a difference in MISO? Wouldn't all those jobs make a difference in the communities that will have coal plants shut down? Crickets. They didn't touch it.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing how the math really just does not add up around SMRs. The speed at which you can develop a nuclear facility is on the order of decades. Large-scale solar does take some time. That Double Black Diamond is the project you're referring to by Swift Current Energy, which is a virtual PPA or a sleeve-through PPA feeding the city of Chicago facilities. So it's a very important project for Illinois. It's a very unique project because it crosses some boundaries, right? The project's in MISO, the off-taker, the city, is in PJM. And that is a Constellation project. You mentioned Constellation being in the nuclear industry as well, which is true of many, parts of the renewables industry, right? Many of these companies have their feet in both worlds, in nuclear, in coal, in oil, and natural gas, as well as wind and solar. But anyway, you could build 4 of these double black diamonds in the same period that you could build a single SMR.
And we pointed to the legislators, and it just did not register at all. They had their minds made up.
Yeah.
In fact, I heard the word in the hallway after the hearing was over. The word grease was used to explain the 17-0 vote to move the bill forward.
Yeah. I mean, here we are. We're trying to decarbonize the economy. The Biden administration has set goals of decarbonizing the economy basically by 2050. And that's a best case scenario. And so that's 27 years away now. And it's just the writing is on the wall that you can't solve this problem with new nuclear power. It's not economical, it's not timely enough, and then there's all these other problems, the waste and the proliferation issues that come along with it. So my takeaway though, Dave, here today is that SMRs, there are some new aspects to them. There are some new technologies, but the problems remain the same, right? The cost of the technology is relatively very high. The pace of development is very slow compared to competing technologies. And the long-term problems of nuclear do not go away with SMRs. You still have a major waste problem. And right. Most Illinoisans are completely, and other states that house nuclear power plants are completely ignorant of this reality because it's just not in the news on a regular basis. That what's happening is the waste is piling up on site because there are no acceptable long-term facilities. There's been attempts to develop long-term facilities in New Mexico and Nevada, but they're not active. They're not open. They're not receiving waste, and so the waste is piling up in our backyards.
And I would add, that's one more environmental injustice, is the fact that wherever the government wanted to try and put a waste facility, usually it was on some poor Indian tribe's land who needed the money. That's what happened in Nevada, happened in Utah, and now they're trying to force it down the throats of the New Mexicans and the West Texans. Both states' governors have opposed it. Both state senator teams have opposed it. And many of the environmental justice activists in both states are opposing it. Yet the Biden administration is going around the country talking about, we're going to look for consent-based siting for these nuclear waste facilities. I'm sorry, where's the consent? They already gave you their answer. Go away. There's one last topic we did not touch on, Tim, and I think it's important. The other point we made to the legislators is that if you go down the route of small modulars, you will be delaying, if not outright sabotaging, the renewables goals that you enacted in CEJA in 2021 and FEJA in 2016. These were the bills that really did a lot to advance more renewables, more efficiency, more equity in energy. But the fact remains is the energy pie is finite, both in terms of access to the grid and in terms of dollars available to spend. If you're going to spend money on small modulars, you are going to cut into the money you have available to implement CEJA, and you will then make them competitors to get on an already constrained transmission grid. As many of your listeners know, it's hard now to get renewables projects hooked into the grid, and that's one of the big problems we're having. You pour more small modulars into the mix, that competition is going to get more fierce, and your whole fight for CEJA is going to go down the toilet.
The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by DinoWatts. If you're a solar PV asset manager or performance engineer, you need better data and better business intelligence. With DinoWatts' digital twin benchmarking technology, you get more accurate, efficient, and faster performance measurement results. The fourth generation Dino recently completed a technical review by DNV. You can download the report at dinowatts.com. That's DENOWATTS.com. Now back to the show. Point well taken. Well, please check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. Give us a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify. That is the best way you can help the show and spread the word about the energy transition. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Reach out to me. I love connecting with my listeners on LinkedIn. You can also connect with me at cleanpowerhour.com. Dave, how can our listeners reach out to you?
We're online at, very simple, www.neis, Nancy Edward Island Sam.org. Our website has a lot of the documents that are pertinent to today's discussion in our resources section. And folks can just send us an email if they have questions, neis@neis.org.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Dave Kraft, the director of NEIS, for being on the show today. Wonderful discussion. I'm Tim Montague. Let's grow solar and storage. Take care, Dave.
Thank you. Stay well.
The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more.